Hello everyone, welcome back. Stories from r/MaliciousCompliance. Story 1. Back in the days when 33.6 kilobits per second modems were hot shit, I worked for the engineering department of a growing company. This company had started small, it was privately owned, and the VPs had all put in a portion of their own money to start the company. By this time in the story, they were finally making a respectable 30 to 40 million a year in profits. But they still acted like a small company, penny pinching. Our engineering department was designing circuit boards with embedded computer systems. And, to program these, instead of soldering the microcomputer to the board, we would solder on a microcontroller socket, and then plug in an in-circuit emulator that would pretend it was a microcontroller, and allow the programmer to create the required program. This in-circuit emulator, or ICE, was made by Hitachi. It plugged into a free PCI slot on your PC, and had a ribbon cable that would attach to the specialized microcontroller die that plugged into the socket. It was a mess. It gave our tiny IT department headaches. And it cost $15,000. And it was an absolute necessity for most of our most popular product lines. And there was only one of them. And we were renting it. It cost $4,000 a month. The first month we had it, our CTO and marketing VP planned our whole new product line around this family of microcontrollers. So, at the end of the month, we engineers asked management to buy this for us, since we would be using it for a while. The engineering VP saw the price tag, and told us to just rent it. Surely, we would be done with it soon. Engineers, being practical, forgot about the objection and just put our noses to the wheel. The CTO and marketing made plans to keep us busy, using this microcontroller line for a while. They pre-ordered a few million chips. After a year, the VP of Finance asked about this recurring contract line item. They called the engineer who had originally started the contract. The engineer helpfully forwarded the approval from the engineering VP, and his later email asking to buy it, and the VP's reply, where he demurred. By the end of the week, this toy was ours. Along with a second one, since finance determined that product rollout was being affected by not enough access to the equipment. Hitachi just gave us the first one. Stopped charging us, and never asked for it back. We paid $15,000 for a second one. No one got fired or demoted. But, at the next department meeting, the engineering VP tried to tell us that we didn't have enough money to upgrade our PCs. That one engineer spoke up, would $40,000 cover it? The company found the money. Next story. About 10 years ago, during my first full-time job out of college, I had a boss who decided she hated me. I'm not completely sure why, but she would go out of her way to make my life miserable. Demoted me to an overnight shift, but wouldn't give me a reason, changed my shift around on a whim, without notice. Once, changed my schedule for the next day, after I had left, without telling me, then, wrote me up when I didn't show up on time, stuff like that. She was a monster. So, I was looking for another job. Well, I found one. And I went in to give her my 2 weeks' notice. This happened to be in the middle of a mass exodus for the company, as I was the 5th person to quit over the course of about 3 to 4 weeks. Morale was very low. And, whenever anyone quit, she would buy pizza for everyone instead of addressing why the place was so miserable and why people were leaving. After I gave my 2 weeks, she said, "Don't tell anyone you're leaving." So I said, "Okay," and walked out of her office, and announced to all my coworkers, "Hey, guess what, everyone? You're all getting pizza." And they instantly knew what had happened. She was very unhappy, and I felt great. I served out the rest of my 2 weeks, and she never spoke to me again. Next story. Years ago, I worked as a cocktail bartender and waiter. A group of suits came in and sat down, and I went to take their order. I got a bad vibe off them from the get-go, and after I finished the order and went to leave, this 30-something sleazy guy said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Walk away slowly, baby, so we can watch." I smiled at him and started to do an overdramatic, slow-motion back away, keeping eye contact with him and smiling the whole time. I told the other waiters about it, and everyone started doing these slow-motion walks whenever they walked past their table. The best one was a busboy, who deliberately dropped something next to their table, then did a very slow and sexy pickup, like the bend and snap from Legally Blonde. They left pretty quickly. Next story. I had a manager who hated reading emails and would miss important issues and meetings because of it. I even suggested text-to-speech to make it less unpleasant, but he told me off. He spent a lot of time playing golf with clients, and was mostly inaccessible. It got to the point where most of the team CC'd me. I was next on the totem pole, so I could grant approvals for stuff like expense reports, and help out on projects my manager was supposed to work on. When I was getting married, I requested 3 weeks off for my honeymoon. Everyone knew I was getting married. The manager even congratulated me on the engagement when it happened. I had 5 weeks of vacation accumulated and didn't think it would be a big deal, especially since I was requesting it nearly 8 weeks in advance. Then a vacation request denied email comes in from our time off system. I emailed my manager, following up, left voicemails, and after a week, he finally replied to an email. Look, we need dedicated people. If you think you can take 3 weeks off for a vacation, you need to reconsider your position here. Keep in mind, my request stated, vacation request for honeymoon. I replied with no consideration needed. My last day will be date in 3 weeks, let me know about transitioning duties. I forwarded this to HR, CCing my manager, and HR sets up my exit interview, but HR tells my manager to set up transition for my responsibilities. During my notice period, I even replied all to this email twice, asking about transition plans, since I didn't get any transition plan. I tell my team, they ask the manager what to do with my duties, and the manager says he'll think about it, but doesn't do anything, nor email anything out. 4 weeks later, I get a call from my old boss. Are you planning on coming in this week? Why would I? Because you work for me? Not as of last week. Stop messing around. Get your ass in the office. I told you my last day when you denied my vacation request. How about giving proper notice and transitions? HR asked you to develop a transition plan and to attend my exit interview. It's not my fault you don't read all your emails. I hang up and block his number, but screenshot the call log and send it to the HR contact with an innocent. Should I be worried? Old manager thinks I still work for him? Fallout. Things went from bad to worse for my old manager. Apparently, I was doing most of his managerial duties, so he actually had to try and get stuff done himself. He also got into some legal issues. Those client golf outings? He played golf, but not with clients. That made his termination with cause, so no severance for him. I ended up at a competitor, with a nice bump in pay. I wanted to start after my honeymoon, but the new company really wanted my help on a pitch. I joined for several weeks, reworking 1/3 of the pitch, and then went on my honeymoon for 3 weeks. They paid me for the entire time off. That garnered a lot of goodwill from both me and my wife. I only left the company because my wife and I moved cross-country, and they didn't have remote positions back then. Next story. The story starts with me and my company. I'm a 30-year-old businesswoman who works in an IT service in a bank space. I'm the girl for everything, basically, but I'm a specialist for first-level support, administration, and backup. Sometimes, even networking. Even when I'm not head of my IT department, I'm basically had all the responsibilities of them. But, unfortunately, my pay grade doesn't reflect that at all. I think of my boss of my IT department as kinda lazy, if not incompetent. He even brags about getting so much money for basically doing nothing. I have a 40-hour week, however, since the whole IT department is my responsibility, I need to keep track of the servers and any problems that can occur 24/7. This is mostly done via emails. When the server status issues a warning or a failure, I will get notified, and then I'm either fixing the problem over remote desktop or going to the company itself, even in my free time. I wouldn't mind this, but I'm not getting paid for this. On the other hand, I'm getting punished when something goes wrong. My boss's boss wasn't that much better. Since it was a fancy bank, everyone should be in a suit the whole time, to let it look professional, best with a skirt and high heels. Only problem is when you work in the first level support, you need to do a lot of behind the scenes work. Like slipping under the desk to do or repair cable management, doing work on the server rack, and doing lots of other activities that make you dirty. You can imagine that this worn out my business clothes really, really fast. And not only that, they were so impractical and really made my work harder. So, I changed my clothes to a comfy hoodie and work pants to fit the work I'm doing a bit better. When my boss saw me, he was furious. He demanded I can't look like a poor hobo inside his bank. I told him that I demand work clothes for both occasions because they are expensive and get worn out quickly. He refused, and I wasn't really happy about this. So much for the introduction. Someday, my boss's boss, head of the whole company, called me. He had a plan. He wanted to create quiet hours, means he didn't want his employees working on weekends to let them rest properly. At first glance, you could say, hey, that's a nice idea. Yeah. No, he just didn't like to pay them for overwork, because he got in some legal trouble with overwork paying in general. Not only that, some employees have strict deadlines and need the extra time to get work done. To actively ensure nobody can't work over the weekend, he wanted the following: please make sure no one can access their emails and remote desktop over the weekend, no exceptions. Since we had a ticket system and were able to attach emails to tickets, I asked him to write an official work task. This has 2 reasons. First, I like everything documented. Second, I have something to protect and secure myself in case the task I was given is incorrect. And it's exactly this that saved me. So I was in my office desk again, thinking how to get the task done and what implication it will have, and then it was clear to me what it meant. The email came from my boss with the task, and indeed he wrote, for everyone, no exceptions. I was thinking to myself, should I write them the implications it would have? After thinking, I thought of how I am treated as a worker, and I Decided against it. I was working immediately at this task, and made an automated process to block every access to emails after Friday, 6 p.m., to Monday, 6 a.m. Weekend came, and it was Saturday, and I was calm, relaxed, because, if you have not noticed by now, by cutting down everyone's emails, means, of course, that I don't receive any updates on the servers. I can't possibly work on it, because my remote access is also cut, of course. If you think, you could forward your work email address to your private address, no, I can't, because we have a very strict data protection. Nothing is allowed to go out. I'm happy. It's still Saturday, middle of the day. I'm cooking myself and my husband a nice meal, and my telephone rings. It's my boss's boss. He talks with a stressed voice and tells me that he can't access his emails. I needed a second to process this, but I responded, that doesn't surprise me at all, since you ordered me to cut everyone's email access, without exceptions. He was angry, very angry, and told me that this obviously doesn't count for him. I told him that he specifically told me that there are no exceptions, and he stated everyone. He then argued that this wasn't how he phrased it, so I reread him his own email. After that, he was silent for a moment. He noticed his flaw in his logic. I broke the silence and asked him, "Sir, if you still want access to your emails on the weekend, that's no problem. Please send me a request per email, and I will work on it first thing on Monday." A bit angry again, he replied that he wanted to have it done immediately, and I calmly explained to him that I couldn't do this, since my remote access is also blocked, like he ordered. He hung up. 10 minutes later he calls me again. He asks me calmly if I can fix the problem right now when he pays me for my overwork. He also wants me to be available at any time, means I should receive my emails and be able to remote work, and that this will raise my pay grade by a lot. I thought that this is the perfect opportunity. I agreed to that condition and pay raise, but only when my coworkers and I finally get work close. He agreed. Since then my work situation drastically improved, and mostly only because I maliciously complied, well aware of the consequences of the given task. Edit. Thank you so much for all your comments and love. I'm glad you liked it. I want to add something here to the 4 types of comments. To the people with positive comments and their own stories, thank you so much. I had no idea this would blow up this much. To the people who complain about my English, yes, I'm German, not a native speaker. I'm giving my best here, and I'm trying to improve on it every day. That's all I can do. To the people with hateful comments, if you don't like it, that's totally fine, but there's no need for sharing insults, really. In my honest opinion, it was a valuable lesson for my boss to let them have a well thought out concept before giving the official task. To the people who don't believe and say it's bullshit, I'm not here to convince you. If I can reach even one person to empower them to improve their work conditions, then that's a complete win in my eyes. Next story. Nearly 2 years ago, I started work at company as their digital marketing person. After I started, it turned out that I was brought in to put out the fires left by my predecessor, the VP of marketing, who had a team of 4, plus himself. He spent over $1 million in 1 year and brought in 5 deals, 2 of them for under $10,000. As you can well imagine, after a performance like that, I had lots of work to do, and very little to do it with. Aside from 1 or 2 paid tools, everything else was to be done using free tools only. I'm gonna do some bragging here. I beat the previous year's figures in all categories, with 10% of the budget. When I started, I thought Boss Man, founder/CEO, had a really good management style, saying things like, "Your successes are yours, your mistakes are mine. And the enemy of good is great. I don't expect perfection. I want you to make sure things work and get them done." In essence, I was allowed to run my own, one-man, department and outsourced freelancers, and as long as I was getting results, he left me alone. Since I was the only person on the marketing team, I also had to learn a large number of skills and platforms that weren't directly related to digital marketing. Not to say everything was perfect, but things were pretty good. One of the main things that weren't perfect was that Boss Man had serious anger management issues. As I said before, he left me alone, but I saw him blow up at and fire other people for stupid shit. He lost it at me too, once or twice, but he'd calm down after a couple of hours, and things would be back to normal. If it looks like an abusive relationship, that's because, looking back, that's exactly what it was. As the year came to an end, I approached Boss and initiated a performance review. I ran him through everything I had done in the past year, and he was pretty surprised at how much I had done with so little. I asked him for a raise, pointing out that I was currently making $8,000 per month in local currency, average is $4,500 per month, when people with my, now augmented, skill set were making between $13,000 to $14,000 per month. I asked him for $12,000. He said he'd get back to me, and never did. Every time I asked him about my raise, he had another excuse. After the last excuse, I began looking for something else. The other day, we had a meeting, and it turns out that, 2 months ago, I made a mistake. It wasn't a critical mistake, and it was rectified within a few hours of discovering the mistake. No harm or damage was caused whatsoever to company, but bossman, flipping, lost it. I mean, slamming on tables, yelling for the whole office to hear, what have you. Then he said the magic words, pack your things up and go home. Think about whether you want to keep working here. So that's what I did, and, 10 seconds later, I said, no, I don't. I started packing my things up while he turned an even deeper shade of red and got even louder. I didn't answer him at all, I just kept on packing up my things and saying goodbye to my colleagues. Turns out that being ignored really pushed his buttons, to the point where he started threatening to call security to have me removed while I was actively removing myself and my things from the office. Here's the part where it gets beautiful, my country is very strict on employees' rights. Sorry, Americans, I feel your pain, his words and behavior are considered an improper dismissal. By law, he's required to give me 30 days notice of dismissal, which he didn't. When he realized his mistake, he convened a pre-dismissal hearing, but it was already too late. He's opened himself up to a lawsuit, which I'm already talking with lawyers about. Because, by law, he has to give me those 30 days notice. Even though he already fired me, for the next 30 days, I'm eligible for all the benefits and social rights in my salary, but I can do jack shit for him, and there's nothing he can do to me without making the incoming lawsuit 10 times worse. I've already got 4 interviews lined up for next week, paying almost double what boss was paying me. And, best of all, I'll be interviewing for other places on his dime. The cherry on top is that, because I'm the only marketing person, without me, nothing happens in the marketing department for the next month. And if he doesn't hire someone on in time, I won't be around to answer any questions the new person might have. Next story. This is a story of MC that a previous boss had done, but involved me directly, as will be explained. The time frame is the early 2000s, for reference. In my late high school, early college years, I had a job doing telemarketing work during winter and summer breaks. While it was boiler room cold calling, we primarily were soliciting donations for agencies that had contracted us to do the work, so I felt less scuzzy. Think police departments, fire departments, etc. We kept a portion of donations for operating expenses. Everything over a certain threshold went directly to the receiving party. Everybody wins. I enjoyed the job, as the scripts were simple. I was allowed to read a book and such between calls, and a number of my friends were also employed there, so we could hang out during lunch breaks. The pay was a decent chunk above minimum wage at that time, so it was a good gig. I also had a knack for it, and at one point, I was 5th in sales across all their sites they had in operation and 2nd in our building. One summer, while driving to work, my car promptly dies with no warning, and I'm left stranded on the road. As you do in this situation, back before cell phones for poor college students were a thing, I walk to the nearest house and ask to use the phone. I call my dad, who starts driving to get me, and call my work to let them know I'll be late. My boss says, fine. And that he will chat with me when I get in. Father shows up with my mother in 2 cars, I take the extra, and he begins the arduous process of towing my car back to the house. This involved tying a rope to the front of the car and to the back of his vehicle, and crawling back home so he could fix it himself. I've been in that back car and did not envy my father, being in the back car with only 10 feet of space between him and the car my mother was driving, but I'm off to work. I arrive to work, clock in almost an hour after the start of my shift, and am promptly told by the front receptionist that my boss would like to see me in his office. So, I head on back. Beginning details completed. Cue the start of the MC story. My boss and I have always had a good rapport. I'm a good worker, get good reviews, and he and I have some similar interests outside of work we can chat about occasionally. When I arrive in his office, he's shuffling some papers around and has laid out a few documents facing me. As close as I can recall, this is the conversation that followed. Boss, hope everything worked out with the car. Glad to have you here. A couple of things I need to discuss with you. First of all, as I'm sure you are aware, being more than 30 minutes late to work is considered a Class C violation, 3 classes, from C to A, C being the least egregious, if insufficient time is given prior to the occurrence. This is your first violation, so I'd like to talk to you about what happens next. I'm sweating at this point. I've never even been talked to about being out of order on anything while working here, and getting my first violation scared the heck out of me. So I'm sitting there, white-faced, and he continues. Boss, no official write-up or anything occurs for a first violation, or even the first few Class C violations, but it is the manager's discretion on the punishment, depending on past behaviors. Now, you are a good employee, and I've put in, to corporate, a few times to give you a raise. But, because you only work during your school breaks, it is denied, as you aren't considered full-time. So, the papers I have here are your termination papers and an offer letter I'd like to extend to you, to hire you back on again. So, in short, before I file these, I'd like to ask, is it okay if I fire you? So we go through the process of him firing me, which then allowed him to extend an offer to me to rehire me at roughly a 25% increase in pay, since he could justify to corporate the bump, as he was hiring someone with experience. In talking with him, he let me know it was something he occasionally did to the high school and college workers to get around the corporate's policy of not allowing raises to people that didn't work 1,000 plus hours in a year. It was his own way of being maliciously compliant with a policy that didn't allow him to reward some people that he thought deserved it. He had been, apparently, waiting for me to do something that he could technically fire me for. The way their back-end systems worked, it wouldn't even show up as a break-in service, since the firing and hiring happened on the same day, and since I never worked more than the minimum 1,000 hours each year, I didn't have any tenure or anything to be worried about losing. The laugh he and the receptionist had when he walked me back to the front to introduce her to the new employee was enjoyable, and I've had a fun story to tell ever since. Edit. Thank you, everyone, for the comments and awards. I also wanted to answer a few commonly asked questions. 1. Why do the fire department and police department need more money? This was more for affiliated agencies and charities. Think, the firefighters' boot drive they do every year. They don't keep your change you toss into the boot, it goes to a charitable cause. 2. Did your dad fix the car? What was wrong with it? I'm not a car person, so I don't know what was wrong with it, but yes, my dad was able to fix it. 3. Do you keep in touch with the boss? This was close to 20 years ago. Unfortunately, I don't keep in touch with very many people from my hometown, including this wonderful man. Last I had heard, he was still working there 4 to 5 years after I had left, and it was still a great place to work. That's it for now. See you in the next post.